John, I think you want to start us off with, I think John had a couple questions he wanted to ask Ken.
Yeah, one thing that uh, I've thought about for a long time is the founders, the American founders, as a leadership class. I mean, Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, Franklin. How do they compare in the broad stroke of, let's say, world history? How does this leadership class of these men that I just mentioned, how does that compare with, well, the leaders of the Roman Republic, Cato, Cicero, or Athens, Pericles, or let's say the British elite that fought the French Revolution and Napoleon, Burke, Pitt, Wellington, they were certainly successful. French Louis XIV and his administrators, the emperors of China, the Mughal emperors of India, uh, empires in Africa, worldwide, the current leaders of the European Union, for that matter. How does this leadership
So,
class, the American leadership class, stack up? I would think, just in terms of say, of statesmanship, of the exercise of statesmanship, they would rank as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, or one of certainly could be argued one of the greatest of entire world history.
I couldn't
Something
agree
like,
with you more, and I think the answer is embedded in your question, John. It's
yeah, it
just
is, of course.
a dream team. Maybe it doesn't have the original philosophical wattage of Greek or Roman, but it certainly, in terms of bringing, let's just remember and put it in a kind of context. I feel that the American Revolution is the most important event since the birth of Christ. That means the people who are there doing the fighting, bottom up, as well as the top down question that you've asked, are hugely significant. And those top down folks, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, ended it. We mutually pledged to each other our lives. I think that asks a fundamental question that many of the others that you referenced may not have considered, while Jefferson and Adams and Franklin did not fire a shot in anger. George Washington did, and Alexander Hamilton did, and was willing to um, give their lives. Washington spent most of the 6.5 years of the war in a tent, not home. He may have been the wealthiest person in America, so he's also mutually pledging not only his lives, but his fortune. I wonder if the richest people in the world are willing at any time to risk that, and their sacred honor, which is, I think, at the heart of all of this. And the free electron that turns up in the quotes that we've assembled over the 10 years it's taken us to do this. The free electron is the word virtue. And I think that's a sort of kind of missing from our conversations today, obviously, with the crassness and the crudeness of politics as it is. But the notion embedded in that last sentence is important. There's also a moment, just a few phrases beyond a pursuit of happiness, the end of the second sentence, and well before the list of usurpations, where Jefferson says, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. Not hard to parse. It means that heretofore everyone has more or less been a subject under some form of authoritarian rule, and we are inventing something else, this new thing, citizens. And that carries with it a huge amount of responsibilities, obviously, but it also carries with it a kind of energy that has to overcome the resistance, to swim upstream against this, evils, while evils being sufferable. It's an extraordinary moment for me, one of the best moments in the Declaration, and I think it speaks to the complexity and the glory of the story that we're telling. I mean, this is a big deal, the American.
Related to,
John, sorry, can I just follow up real quickly on one part
okay,
of
yeah,
that?
go ahead.
Can you possibly explain more what you mean by virtue as the free electron?
Well,
I'm
they're all constantly, and they're reaching back into antiquity, which is part of John's question, both Greek and Roman, to find these virtues. Franklin is very big on it first, but it's adopted as part of a kind of Enlightenment package as the thoughts are coming from France, from Scotland, but they're also reaching back, as a good deal of the Renaissance and later Enlightenment did, back to antiquity to find inspiration emerging from the Dark Ages and medieval time. This word virtue, this notion of an essential responsibility of the human being to himself and to a larger polity, becomes a critical thing. There's an anguished quote that we include by Adams, who said, I'll get this wrong. I wonder, there's so much venality, so much avarice and ambition, so much lust for profit. I wonder if there's enough virtue for a republic.
Well,
And so
they read Montesquieu,
that's right. That's
and
right.
Montesquieu said virtue is that was synonymous with patriotism.
That's right,
Civic
exactly. And
patriotism.
so
That was
remember,
virtue.
so the rebels, as the British never stopped calling us, called themselves early on in the resistance, not the revolution, in the resistance, patriots, which drove the British crazy because, of course, this was a British term that allied itself with what we'd call Whigs, but those who were defenders of the constitutional monarchy that was, arguably, we kind of call balls and strikes. We don't make loyalists bad guys here. We'd understand why you might be a loyalist in this situation, looking at things, your prosperity, your health, your education, the land you own in these new colonies, or not new colonies, in the 13 British colonies in North America. Have delivered, so much to you. You're going to throw it out for something which on April 19, 1775 has zero chance of success. It's pretty interesting. We even follow many, many different loyalists throughout, including one, John Peters, who in a very climactic moment at the Battle of Bennington in our fourth episode, kills his best friend growing up, who is mounting the parapet. He is about to surrender, but drives a bayonet into his chest, deflected by the bone. And as John Peters says, I was obliged to destroy him. His friend, a man named Jeremiah Post. So you get the sense of the intensity of the Civil War aspect of this, in addition to being a revolution of ideas and a revolution in a military sense, and also, of course, a global war, the fourth global war over the prize of North America.
Let me pick up on just a sort of a follow-up question on the American Revolution again, in a world historical context compared to other revolutions. The American Revolution compared to other revolutions. And again, I'm going to sort of put the answer in the question too as well, but you get your thoughts on this. It's exceptional in a particular way. The American Revolution, unlike, say, the French Revolution,
Right.
the Haitian Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Maoist Revolution, the Cuban Revolution. There was no terror at the end. There was discrimination. The Tories fled. They went to England. They went to Canada.
Not all of them. Most of them stayed.
Most, yeah, but
75,000 left.
they weren't executed. There
No,
was no terror
no,
in that sense.
correct.
And the result of the revolution was a consensual government.
That's correct.
Whereas it wasn't in France. It led to Napoleon. It led to a dictatorship. Even the revolution, you could say the revolutions of 1848 in Berlin and Vienna, they were unsuccessful. So
Exactly.
I mean, ours was a successful one that then became a consensual government. Where the other successful ones, all of them became dictatorships. Even 1848 France, that led to Napoleon III after.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So this was a different type of revolution then, and
Yeah, and it's the first, it's the
right.
original
And maybe the only one that's
anti-colonial movement.
right.
That was let me just say, for the purposes of our goalposts are about 20 years before 1754 to about when Washington resigns the presidency. I mean, does not stand again. Those are the goalposts. And while we acknowledge that this is going to set in and inspire revolutions in Europe and in Latin and South America and Asia and Africa, we don't need to put our thumb on the scale and qualify or rate them in that way, as both your first and now your second question is doing. We're just saying this is, and I think those guys in Philadelphia and the others of that sort of leadership class are among the most remarkable. But I think it just shows our film doesn't have to sort of point arrows or create neon signs and say, this is great. It's just a hell of a good story and so complex and unknown, largely because there are no photographs and newsreel, largely because I think we want to, encrust the revolution with the barnacles of sentimentality because we're afraid that if you get into the nitty gritty, it diminishes it. If you get into the nitty gritty, it actually makes it even more inspiring in my mind.
I'd like to ask you another rating question, Ken, even though you guys, I know it's not your role, as you just said. But if someone, in watching the documentary, which we're very eager to see, we haven't had a chance to see it other than just the snippets on the 60 Minutes interview or the CBS Sunday Morning interview.
Oh,
Um, uh, if someone watches it, who would you say, what individual would you say comes off as the greatest hero of the
Oh, without a
revolution?
question, it's George Washington. We don't have a country without him. Two, in fact, black historians, Annette Gordon-Reed and Christopher Brown, uh, basically come right out. Not basically, they come right out and say that we don't have a country without him. And it's sort of interesting when you're wrestling, as I have done in all my films, dating back 50 years. With hugely complex narrative that is tolerating the inevitable undertow that's there that is part of a good story. It is interesting how much he rises to the top. I was just in Mount Vernon. We had 9,000 people, 8 or 9,000 people on the lawn with a threatening and then actual rainstorm while we were sharing an hour of clips because everybody was there to give him his due. But we're also calling balls and strikes. I don't mean to belabor this baseball metaphor, but you know, in the highlight reel of our current media situation, Babe Ruth only hits home runs. Well, he struck out more times than he hit home runs, and he only came up to bat once every 9 times. So if you can accept that, calling balls and strikes, and sometimes he hits into inning double plays, you can understand that he makes at least two devastating tactical mistakes at Long Island and at Brandywine. Strike out. Okay. That's it. But we don't have a country without him. He knows how to defer to Congress. He knows how to inspire people in the dead of night. He knows how to pick subordinate talent. He knows and he has a fundamental, as the scholar Jane Kamensky says, an understanding of an insurrectionary force. He doesn't have to win. He just can't be defeated, right? Completely defeated, surrendered. The thing would have been over in Long Island if the fog hadn't come in or if Howe hadn't been so timid to press the advantage that he had after that first day. Same thing at Brandywine. He's then a couple of weeks later trying the bold move of Germantown, which again, a minor decision on his part, not letting the Chew House go causes, and nobody's responsible for the fog except God. And that causes the disaster that Germantown turns into after being a spectacular, might have driven the British right out of Philadelphia right then and there that morning. Very bold strokes. But he's able to sort of realize that his leadership can apply not just in these startling victories. And he's rash too. I mean, he rides out in the middle of Kips Bay and, somebody grabs the reins. He rides out at Princeton and an aide covers his eyes thinking he's going to be killed. And if he's killed, it's done. He does that in Monmouth significantly and stops without saying a word, a retreat, and suddenly the Americans regroup and hold their own against the British. And essentially, though it's a draw, the British withdraw on a very hot day. The Americans are left with the field, and they can claim a victory of an important dimension. And then you've got the most spectacular thing of all, which is twice ceding his power. And so, he's it. But that doesn't mean that that's the only story you want to tell. You want to know about John Greenwood, a 14-year-old kid from Boston who joins up a few days after Lexington and Concord. You want to know about Joseph Plum Martin, 15 years old from Connecticut, who signs up a few days after the Declaration and serves out the entire war, is the kind of grunt who's there at Redoubt number 10 with Hamilton and Lafayette and black soldiers from Rhode Island storming the redoubt, basically permitting the the surrender to take place because of the bringing the big heavy French guns into place. I mean, it's just amazing. And he's right there going through the abattis, and guys next to him are being shot, and he's describing it. Or a young girl, Betsy Ambler, or Mercy Otis Warren, the first historian of the war, a philosopher, a satirist, a poet, a historian, a friend of Abigail's, Abigail herself, who, thank God these two people were apart for so long, John and Abigail. Otherwise, we wouldn't have her extraordinary writing along with his extraordinary observations of the thing. And so there's Native American people, and we tend to say them rather than to acknowledge that superimposed within the 13 colonies are native peoples who have either been assimilated or are coexisting. There are many nations on the western edge that are as distinct from each other as Virginia is from Massachusetts or France is from Prussia, for that matter. And they've been on the world scene for a couple centuries. They're diplomatically and economically, they're trading partners with a kind of sophistication that we don't ever extend to them. So if you do that, and then you have, out of the 2.5 to 3 million people there in the colonies, you have 500,000 who are free or enslaved blacks. And then it's a global war. So you got to understand who the German are, that from the top down and the bottom up, and the British soldiers and their king and their ministers and their generals, and the Irish and the Scots and the Welsh and the English, most of whom, had been their families have been working land for 1,000 years that they didn't own, and they're looking at these colonists who now own their land. So
Yeah.
the dynamics of this are great. The Germans are so interesting. Many of them would desert and blend into German communities. Many of them captured or prisoners of war would escape and blend into German things. And those that went back, many of them came back with their families to settle. So you have a sense that not only is this a geopolitical prize for empire, but it also represents in the sort of day to day what it meant for an individual who could finally, maybe for the first time in 1,000 years, own a plot of land. And
Uh,
and then there are casualties to that, of course, right?
yeah.
So all of that is part of the complex story. We just finished the World Series, so I've had my faith in
One
the game.
heck of a World Series.
That was great.
One heck of a World
Right.
Series. My faith
Unbelievable.
in the complexity of it restored it. And if you don't understand how a middle infielder Rojas could be a determining factor amidst this, panoply of superstars, then
Right.
you miss the essence of a good story.
Absolutely. When you were talking about, I love your answer on Washington, by the way. When you were talking about his tactical mistakes, I was thinking of Babe Ruth trying to steal second at the end of the 1926 World Series against
Exactly. I
Cleveland.
wasn't going to go so in the weeds with you, Jeff, but that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you want to create it's. I mean, it's taken us 10 years. I mean, it'll be, to be honest, when it's broadcast, it will be 9 years and 11 months. So forgive me
When
the
will it be broadcast?
November 16th, Sunday, November 16th, which is 2 weeks from
Oh, that's
yesterday.
fast. Wow.
And it will be streaming for free too,
Did,
instantly, the whole thing.
were you
Okay,
always
great.
trying to time it for the Quarter-Millennial?
When I started in December of 2015, Barack Obama still had 13 months to go in his presidency. Nobody was talking about 250. I got about 3 years into this thing and I went, whoa, if we hit our marks, we could be done by the spring of 25, and we could be the 250th anniversary of Lexington and Concord. And my co-director, Sarah Botstein, the sort of the Nathaniel Green, the great, a strategist and sort of logistical person of this production, in addition to her great creativity, said, we're going to be mixing and onlining, which was true. And we'll be in the fall. And I said, well, good. At least we'll be ahead of what I presume, if they do anything, will be a lot of fife and drum treacle about the revolution at on July 4th, 1776, because the anniversaries are going to go all the way for those of us like you guys and me, who are paying attention, all the way till 39, which
Sure.
is the establishment of the government.
Yeah.
So, we
Or
got a lot of
yeah.
markers to hit. And I thought, how about isn't that a good thing to have a complex conversation about it? And
What are,
then suddenly you hear about 250s and you hear about competing visions of 250, and we're just, we're keeping our heads down. We have our blinders on. We know that what rhymed in, to use Mark Twain's famous phrase, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If he'd said that, he's absolutely right. No event has happened twice, but the rhymes come and go. Their significance as we pass, and our job is to not pay them any mind. There's a wonderful moment where there is a total eclipse like we had last year in 78. And Joseph Plum Martin, this grunt that I've been telling you about, is marching across the Delaware to follow now Clinton's troops that are heading to have abandoned Philadelphia. And he said in the olden days, a total eclipse would have been an omen of some positive or negative thing. Here, we paid it no mind. So
yeah.
it went dark. It went dark for a while, and it's just like any grunt in any. I mean, he sounds like the guys we interviewed in our Vietnam series. He sounds like the guys we interviewed in our World War II series. He sounds like the guys whose voices we brought into our Civil War series.
Well,
Um,
well,
one foot in front of the other.
your timing is perfect, obviously. And
It's totally accidental, but I have had enough of these that I begin to feel there must be some divine intervention, because when the Civil War came out, it was exactly what we wanted. When baseball came out, there was a strike and it was exactly what we wanted.
yeah,
Almost all of the films seem to hit either an articulated, or as it is now, or an unarticulated hunger to know a little bit more. Our national parks, for example, so out of our topic here today, came out. It just wasn't a travelogue. It wasn't which inn your family should stay at. It was like a deep geological and ethnographic, as well as dramatic story of how these places came into being.
our
One question I'd like to ask you is you described this, I think, as a continuing revolution.
Well, I didn't.
what
That's Benjamin Rush, right?
Yeah. Uh, well, Rush, I guess, I think, let's say, what did he mean by that? I mean, he meant the establishment. Republican institutions had to be established
Well, no, what he said
successfully.
was the American War is over, but the American Revolution is going on.
Right.
And that meant that we were going to be revitalized by, I think, not the bloody revolutions that this, unfortunately, our revolution anticipates in France and all the other places that you've described, John, but revolution in ideas and how you're growing, in fits and starts that Republican idea.
So that was Benjamin Rush. Then we're not. Are we saying the revolution is continuing now, or is it?
I think we're constantly,
And what does
to
that
me,
mean
the
exactly?
genius of it is that we're a process country, right? We're in pursuit of happiness. We want to debate what happiness is. They meant lifelong learning for the most part, as far as I can discern, because lifelong learning would provide you with the virtue necessary to earn the right of citizenship. But it's pursuit's the key word, like a more perfect union. So we're a nation in the process of becoming. So I interpret Russia's statement as this idea of a kind of perfectibility. You're heading towards it. You're just you'll never get there, but that's the human obligation.
Well, I guess one thing about perfectibility, one of the key political philosophy of the founders was a realistic view of human nature.
That's correct.
It comes through in the Federalist Papers. It
It
comes
does
through
indeed.
Federalist 51, if men were angels, all of that.
Yep.
So, in a sense, is we're never going to be perfect.
Right.
And in fact, that was the problem, in a sense, with the French Revolution, as the Federalists at least saw that this was a utopian regime that Robespierre and these people were trying to create, very different from what Washington and what the Federalists, and even later Jefferson, originally was friendly to the French Revolution, later saw its faults. But this concept of human nature was sort of at the heart uh, of American political thought and the American regime, whether it's possible to create a government of men, as Hamilton said in Federalist One. It was because human nature considered both positive and negative aspects. It had both.
That's exactly right. The
So
the
all of
same
that.
Same
So,
quantities of venality and virtue obtain then, generosity and greed, as they do now.
so that
And
in a
so,
sense means we're not going to be perfect.
right.
Yeah,
No,
a more
we're
perfect union, I think, means improvement in a sense.
yes, that's exactly what
It
I said.
doesn't mean the creation of a utopia.
No, no, I said it's you're
Yeah.
tilting toward it. It's never achievable. And that's right. This goes back to Ecclesiastes. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Human nature doesn't change. And yet the moment that I'm describing is actually where, as Thomas Paine said, we have it not since the time of Noah do we have a chance to sort of change things, that the world turned upside down. So there is this brief moment of a kind of leap of possibility, at least within the human realm, and will always be, as my citing John Adams says, always be beset by these anxieties about the imperfectness of human beings.
Yeah,
What
John
what
Adams is, I don't know if you touch on this, his discussions with the French, with Condorcet and the French Revolution. And it was a whole question of utopianism versus sort of a realistic view of human nature. He had
Yeah,
letters
we
back
don't.
and forth.
As I said, I mean,
That
we've
may be outside of what you're talking because
yeah, yes, I did
that
do a
happened in
film
the
on
80s.
Benjamin Franklin, which we dealt a little bit more
Yeah,
with that because we spent more time in France than we
yeah.
do in this thing.
Ken, what do you make of the lack of the we no longer really use the word virtue much in our current society.
Or honor.
What do you make of that in terms of our efforts to move toward a more perfect union as opposed to a less perfect union?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with a kind of sort of obsession with a kind of media moment, the preoccupation with the dialectic, not just political, but in every sort of way. That you're focused, people say this is called social, there's something on here called social media. I don't participate in it, but it ain't
Nor
social.
do I.
It ain't social, right? It's not, I mean,
Yeah.
it just social media ain't is what I've said. And so I think that what happens is that if you live in a disposable and all-consuming present moment, blissfully unaware of the historical tides that have brought you to this moment, or where those tides may indeed take you, then you've abdicated some of the very things that most concerned the founders as they were creating that. And so we're just living in times where the things that they work so hard to kind of reverse engineer about seem to be sort of having more traction than usual. So I think for me, if an individual is in crisis, they go to a pastor or they go to a professional, and the first thing that person asks is, "Where were you born? Who are your parents? What was your growing up?" And you kind of reassemble a narrative that works. If this, in fact, your personal narrative is somehow been disrupted by trauma or whatever it might be, it's true of nations and of people. And I think going back to the origin story permits you a chance to re-remember, perhaps reinvigorate what it was that animated this thing. What did it mean? What are the questions you could ask yourself? Would I have been a loyalist or a patriot? Would I have been willing to fight for a cause? Would I have been willing to die for a cause? Would I have been willing to give up my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor in pursuit of this completely untested idea? All of those are big deals in the scope of human events, but also intimate questions that we can ask. And so, in a glib way, I would hope, and people say, what do you want people to take away? I just said, it's a good story we've worked on. Whatever it is you take away is what you take away. But I'd like to hope that maybe it would activate a conversation that would help us put the us back in the US a little bit, because we're now at a place where we're so superficially, I believe, divided, but we share these things in common. And I think that this extraordinary story is worth understanding its complex dimensions in order to be able to apply it to a contemporary moment, which seems to us unknowable, ungraspable, sort of, a tsunami of stuff that we can't possibly organize or make sense of. And I just disagree.